Dr. Director, Ron called from across the roof. Get everyone back inside her. Hurry. Across the roof from him, Faye Morgan grinned evilly. The rising wind was making her blood-red hair flow behind her. Yes, by all means, Betty, she said. Get everyone back inside. Ronnie and I will have a few things to discuss. Dr. Director looked back at Ron. Ronald, are you sure? Do it, Ron said sternly, not taking his gaze off of Faye. The aurora of the mystical monkey power around him flared briefly before returning to a steady glow. Dr. Director nodded and motioned everyone to get out of the plane. As she stepped down, Miss Stoppable ran to her son. Ronnie, come on, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do, Mom. Ron's gaze was steady. Faye folded her arms and looked amused. She killed him, Kim. Actually, it was more of an assistant thing, Faye replied. Ron narrowed his eyes and gently took his mother by the shoulders and pushed her aside. Go downstairs, Mom. I'll be down in a minute. I'm not letting you face that thing alone. Ron finally turned to her, his expression softening. There's no one else left to stop her, Mom. If I don't do it, who will? Miss Stoppable looked at her son, her eyes watering. She then threw her arms around him. You come back to me in one piece, young man, or you're gonna get it. Understand? She sobbed. Ron smiled. Yes, ma'am. From across the roof. Oh, that's just too nauseating. Can we get it on with it, please? Ron and his mother looked back and gave Faye an identical look. Faye then simply put her hands on her hips and looked bored. Miss Stoppable broke from Ron as she went to go join the rest of the group. As the group headed back inside, the Possibles looked at Ron. Their expressions were all that was needed. Do what you have to do. She understand. Wade then passed Ron on his way across the roof. Good luck, Ron. I wish I could be more of help. Ron then smirked. Wade, my man, you've got to be more than help for all of this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Rufus. Take care of Rufus for me, okay? And Rufus, you hang in there, buddy. I'll be right back. Rufus sniffled and bawled as Wade took him through the roof access. Dr. Director paused before leaving. We'll be ready just in case, she said. Ron nodded. Director left and left the door clanged shut. Faye rolled her eyes. Finally, she snorted. Any other way of touching family moments you want to have before we experience and how exciting levels of pain? Ron cracked his knuckles, then moved over to a fighting stance. Only one. If Kim's still in there somewhere, you know that you aren't going to win. Because she loves me and I love her and... Oh Christ, don't give me that true love conquers all shit. Save it for the movies, with the chicks' flirty dresses who dance with forest animals and scientific teapots. Faye interrupted. She slowly began circling Ron, who pivoted on one step to keep her into view. Faye feinted couple times, causing Ron to put his guard up. You know, despite the fact that you've actually been really snotty ever since I got you out of that cell, I actually do like you, Ronnie. You're like me. I am nothing like you, Ronald snarled. Faye then gave a predatory one-side grin. Really? You really don't think so? Let's see. You almost always tell the truth. So do I. You always keep your word to Kimmy. So did I. And we both left her in the dirt. Ron started. What? You really couldn't tell, Faye said. She was afraid of you, Ronnie. Don't call me Ronnie, Ron yelled, charging across the roof and executing a strike, to which Faye easily blocked. Ron followed up with more strikes, to which it was effectively parried, with the two moving across the roof, extending a few punches and kicks. Ron executed a perfect foot sweep, which Faye jumped over. When she landed, she brought her foot up for a high axe kick. Ron then crossed her forearm and above his head and blocked a kick. She was afraid of you, Ron then growled, shoving things, sending Faye stumbling. Faye then shifted her weight and then turned to a stumbled cartwheel that left her standing upright. She then laughed as Ron got to his feet. Oh, I'm not going to argue with you on that, she said. But she was just all afraid of you. I am not the one who is trying to hurt her. Faye then laughed. Who said anything about hurting her? It wasn't Dad. It wasn't for that reason she was afraid of me either. It was represented, Ronnie. She was afraid of our power. She was afraid of being replaced. Faye then began moving forward, flipping across the roof, increasing the speed with each flip. She head spun around in the air and planted both feet into Ron's chest. Ron fell to the ground, while Faye was being pushed off of him, backflip into the air and back into the feet. That's not true, Ron said quietly. Faye then shook her head. Really? She then saw the footage of the Laudorian war drones recorded when you fought Warmonga and Warhog. She then saw what you can do. Let's face it, Ronnie. When your sidekick acquires nearly god power like you, or above average of cheerleading skills, really isn't going to cut it anymore? If you could really destroy an alien warship single-handed without needing to be inside it, what do you need her for? She was done, Ron. And when I came along, I was able to kick hundreds more times of ass than she ever did. Well, it was only a matter of time before she was going to give up. Kim doesn't give up. Ron then got to his feet, started running start and slid across the roof. Faye flipped into the air, but Ron managed to catch her foot between her shins and rotated her sharply, sending her crashing to the roof. Faye yelped as her chin hit the roof and bit her tongue hard, and as she kicked her way out of Ron's leg grip and got to her feet, spitting out blood. Nice, she commented. Of course she did that. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here, would I? You outclassed her, Ron, and she knew it, so she's gone, and now you've established that fact. Faster than Ron could follow, Faye reached down and pulled him close. Her face had lost all psychologically amused expression, now looked evil and menacing. Stop holding back! With a growl of extortion, she spun and threw Ron over to the side of the building. Ron's yell dropped her all away as he fell out of sight. Faye snorted and walked out of the edge of the roof. She peered over at the edge. We are finally going to do this old cliche, she then called down. No sooner were the words from out of her mouth than it was first connected with her jaw, sending her flying with a grunt of pain. And at the same time, lightning crashed, thunder roared, and rain began pouring down as Ron, surrounded by his mystical aurora, levitated up until the roof. Ron then glared down at Faye. You want to give up now? Faye looked at him and grinned. Are you kidding? I'm having way too much fun. Faye's claws ripped out through the fingertips of the gloves and sprung to her feet, taking a swipe at Ron. Ron then backflipped out of the way with one of his feet flashing out. Faye then snapped her hands out and caught it, then spun it around in place and sent Ron across the roof, causing him to crash into the roof access door. It buckled under the impact, and Ron slid down to the ground. That's it, he snarled. He then got up to his feet and concentrated. The aurora flared up around him. His hair spiked upwards and slammed his foot down to the roof, sending a massive semiotic shockwave across the floor. Gravel and dust rippled across the roof. Faye then leaped into the air to avoid the wave, and as she rose into the air, Ron tackled her around the waist and bore her down to the ground. Faye then landed on her stomach, Ron on top of her. Bastard, she cried, throwing an elbow back. It just connected on just under Ron's ribcage, forcing the air out of his lungs. Ron then gasped for breath as a mystical monkey aurora disappeared. Faye forced Ron off of her, and as she got to her feet, following up with the elbow with a kick. To the same place, Ron had tried to howl in pain, but he couldn't get the air into his lungs. Hail to the mystical monkey bastard, Faye taunted, kicking him again. Ron then rolled across the floor, trying to get to his feet. His lungs were burning, and he found himself lacking the strength to get up. Faye then walked up and kicked him in the face. Behold, the chosen one, Faye sneered, as Ron flipped onto his back, blood then spewing from his nose and mouth. Faye then stood up in him and looked down. And like many heroes, he's going to die for the woman he loves. Isn't that just... Ah! Ron had gotten his wind back up and struck out his hand, extending his fingers at the end. So they had hit the nerve cluster right underneath her kneecap. The leg collapsed and Faye fell to the ground. The mystical monkey aurora returned, and Ron threw an arm around Faye's neck, clasping her in a sleeper hold. Faye struggled, but with Ron's arms he couldn't move. Give up, Ron said quietly. Give up or I swear I will choke you to death. Fuck you, Faye gasped. Ron tightened his grip. Give up, he repeated. Not a chance. Faye felt her head lighten and her vision began darkening around the edges. And he smiled. Go ahead. Do it. Ron's frown deepened. It's not a bluff. I know, Faye answered. It gets easier, doesn't it? First the Laudori invasions, now me. And oh, they are now gonna fear you, Ronnie. That will be fun, won't it? Ron's frown disappeared. He remembered how he felt when Global Justice had reported that the remains of Wamorga and Warhawk had been found. He didn't want to kill them, just neutralize them. And it had taken Kim weeks to convince him that it had been an accident. Even still, he never wanted to feel that way again. He then looked down at Faye and found Kim staring up at him. Ron, help, she said weakly, before passing out. Ron quickly looked over and cradled her in his arms. Kim, he said quietly. Her eyes flashed open at the sound of his voice. Her purple eyes. Sucker, she taunted. Ron wasn't quite sure what she saw. 1 second he was holding Kim, and then her face blurred. It wasn't in the right description, but it was the closest that he could think of that explains it. What he saw, he also didn't have any word of a sickening, wormy sensation of the transformation of the body in his arms. In less than a second, Faye had returned and clutched his throat. The claws of her hands pressed onto his soft flesh. Blood began to swell from where the claws had been pierced his skin. Ron automatically grabbed her wrists with both hands, trying to pry it from his neck. It was like trying to move an iron bar set on the concrete. Ron managed to pull Faye's hands back enough to prevent her from crushing his windpipe. Faye chuckled. Look like a stalemate, Ronnie. I can't just get it up yet. I seriously doubt you're gonna break my grip. Ron's eyes narrowed and let go of Faye's wrist, quickly grabbing her shoulders. Faye yelped in surprise as Ron shifted his weight and began rolling down the two of them across the roof. Faye let go of his neck and glanced at the rapidly approaching edge. She then looked back up at Ron, whose stony expression indicated that he had no intention of slowing down. Oh no you don't, Faye cried, bringing up one knee sharply and painfully between Ron's legs. Ron's eyes practically bugged out of his head as he gritted his teeth in pain. He let go of Faye and the two split apart, rolled back to a stop. Neither of them moved. They just laid there on the roof, breathing, letting the wind and rain wash over them. Ron then slid onto his side and threw up. The purging made him feel slightly better. Nearly every muscle in his body was crying out in agony. Although he had no intention of showing it, he still could know just how much about to reach his limit with his mystical monkey power. He had to finish it, and fast. He rolled over onto his stomach and got ready to his feet, when Faye leapt on top of him and forced him to the ground. She gripped onto his hair and smashed his face into the roof. I've had enough of you, Stoppable, she growled with her teeth. She then pulled his head back and slammed it onto the roof again. Blood was already flowing freely from Ron's nose and mouth. Now one of the eyes was beginning to swell. Faye wasn't much better in her condition. She had a large gash running down her cheek. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, and she was pretty sure two of her teeth were loose enough to come out. She bashed Ron again. Give up, she said, her hoarse voice. Give up or I'm going to rip out your throat. Then I'm going to kill your parents, then Kim's parents, and then Dweeb's, then Wade, then... Faye then brought Ron's head up and leaned in close and whispered in his ears. I'm going to make my own street with me, dear defenseless Hannah. Ron's then eyes flashed up, and his mouth curled into a snarl. He then bucked his head back, forcing Faye to smack herself in the face with her own hand. She yelped in pain and surprise, and fell to her back. Ron then leapt on top of her and hauled her by the shirt. His aurora flared brightly, and his eyes glowed with unearthly light. Don't touch my sister, he bellowed, his voice echoing with the primal rage of 1,000 monkeys, apes, and other primates. He spun around to his feet and threw Faye over his head towards the edge of the roof. As she passed over him, Faye's hands lashed out and grabbed her collar by his shirt. The momentum was much too much for Ron to comprehend as they both hurtled over towards the edge of the ground, even 7 stories below. Attention Global Justice, this is Dr. Director speaking. As of now, I'm back in control. Disregard all orders issued by either ICAD-1 or Acting Director Du. We are no longer in business of illegally kidnapping people and holding them against their will. No disciplinary action will be taken at the present time. However, an investigation will be forthcoming, and we shall see what happens next. Then, the medical team reports holding back cell block C and clean up what you find there. More information to follow, that's all. Dr. Director clicked off the intercom and sat back down on her desk chair of the medical team was resting her cast, was resetting it. She looked assembled the throng of people. Wade, can you and Dr. Possible bring Kimberly back? Well, maybe, Wade said. In the fury of what I want to do could work, but there's only a 50% chance it will, Anne finished. We can't force a permanent change. We are pretty sure that Faye's rapid development and mental separation of a side effect of DNA means modified Jekyll formula. And at this point, Faye isn't a separated personality. She's a completely separate person. But the best we could do is try to force Kim and Faye to fight each other in collective mind. Which it means it could go either way, Director finished. She then looked up at Dr. Possible. I have to consider the safety for the world as whole. If we do this and Faye wins, you will have to prevent us from doing what we have to do. Faye and Anne and James looked at each other. Director could see the conflict in their eyes and the resolution. They held each other for support and looked at the global justice leader. If Faye wins, James said, then that means our little girl is really dead. And if that's the case, Anne finished, as far as we're concerned, she could burn in hell for it. First off, Wade said, trying to break the tension, we better make sure it's even possible to bring Kim back. For all we know, Faye may be right. We could get back up there and... Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of blue light that went through the window of the office. A surrounding crash that caused the whole building to vibrate. Dr. Director grabbed the phone. Report! What the hell was that? Director frowned as the report came back. We have a medical team on standby and cleared the science lab in subsequent queue. I'm sending Mr. Load and Dr. Possible down here. And make sure somebody make the stoppables comfortable for crying out loud. She then slammed the phone and looked up at the group. They just fell off the roof and made a large crater in front of the building. The medical team of squad security agents arrived and were waiting in the lobby. When Dr. Director arrived with James, Mr. Stoppable, and Wade, Anna had gone down to the science lab to supervise the accumulation of the equipment she and Wade were going to need. The twins were assisting her, and understandably shell-shocked, Miss Possible and equally obvious Hannah were taken to push the reception from where Global Justice welcomed Dingenese and UN officials. The head of the security squad leader saluted as the group entered the lobby. Ma'am, so far, no activity outside the doors. Security cameras were apparently fried from whatever has happened out there. Has anyone tried going out there? Dr. Director asked. The security chief shook his head. Given that what we've been dealing with, man, I am not prepared to put any more of my team back out into danger. Director smiled. Smart man. All right, I want all security flanking doors. Med team, be ready for anything. We don't know if either of them survived the fall, but we want to make sure to be ready for if they did. I'm going to open the door and... The doors burst open, and a bruised and bloody exhaust of Ron Stoppable staggered into the lobby. He was dragging an equally bruised, bloody, but more importantly, unconscious, Faye Morgan by her shirt collar behind him. He peered from the group, and with his good eye, he then dragged Faye into the room and dropped her unceremoniously onto the floor. Kim's alive, he said, simply. Now get this bitch out of my girlfriend. With that, his eyes rolled up and his head fell forward. Global Justice agents swarmed to catch him. The medical team then strapped Faye down tightly into a gunnery, while the security team did likewise for Ron. Although the restraints weren't nearly as tight, the group looked at Director. Orders, ma'am? Said the security chief. Dr. Director looked at Faye, then briefly back up. You heard the man. Let's get this bitch out of his girlfriend.